Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into some really fascinating ideas about evolution. Think about those truly mind-boggling adaptations you see in nature, like a giant leaf insect, so perfectly disguised it even has fake mold spots. Or maybe a blind mole, losing its sight over generations spent underground. These are just incredible transformations. And while Darwin, of course, gave us this amazing framework, some of these adaptations still make you wonder, right? They spark these really deep questions. So today our deep dive is into a pretty compelling new perspective. It comes from Rob Coe's book, The Feedback Mechanism, Darwinism Evolved. Our mission for you listening is to explore what this feedback mechanism, or FM, is all about. How might it sort of complement or maybe even expand how we understand these incredible feats of life? Okay, let's unpack this.
What's really fascinating, I think, is the book's suggestion at its core
Yeah.
that evolution might be, well, more than just random mutations plus survival. It's proposing this much more active, ongoing conversation, you could say, between an organism and its environment, influencing development really early on.
Exactly. And this deep dive, well, it's your shortcut to getting your head around this cutting edge thinking, hopefully giving you some of those aha moments about how life adapts. But to really get what Kola is arguing, we should probably set the stage a bit first. We all know Darwin, right? His contribution was just monumental. The framework he built, things like variation within species, the differences between individuals, and then natural selection, how the environment kind of chooses the traits that work best for survival. It totally changed how we see life. This whole idea of descent with modification. It's elegant,
Oh,
powerful.
absolutely. Darwin's insights were revolutionary, no doubt, and they're still the bedrock of biology. But, as science moved forward, some, let's say, puzzles started to pop up. Darwinism is super strong, explaining small changes, microevolution, but the book highlights that it sometimes struggles a bit to fully explain where totally new things come from big structures, major evolutionary leaps, what we call macroevolution.
Right, and these weren't just tiny details. There were some big questions lingering. Like, Darwin saw variation, but he didn't know how it happened. Genetics was still a black box. So the origin of new traits was mostly put down to, well, randomness. And then there's the fossil record. Sometimes species just seem to appear quite suddenly, not always that slow, gradual change he pictured. And complex things like the eye. People always asked, could something that intricate, needing so many parts working together perfectly, really come about just through tiny, random steps? These were the sorts of fundamental questions that kept scientists looking, thinking maybe there's more to the story. But the journey didn't just start with Darwin. Way before him, early 19th century, there was another thinker, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He had a very different idea, and interestingly, parts of it are sort of echoing again today.
That's right, Lamarck, famous for the giraffe example, stretching its neck. His main idea was the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Basically, if an organism changed during its life, like used a muscle a lot and made it stronger, it could pass that improvement to its kids. It implied a more directed evolution, almost like life was purposefully trying to get better.
And yeah, while his main theory about purposeful change didn't really hold up, it left this intriguing question hanging. Can the environment actually influence traits that get passed on? And surprisingly, modern science, specifically epigenetics, is showing us, well, maybe there's a kernel of truth there. So epigenetics, it's not about changing the actual DNA code, the fundamental instructions. How does it work then?
Yeah, think of it like dimmer switches on your genes, or maybe sticky notes you put on the instruction manual. Epigenetics studies changes in gene expression, turning genes on or off, or dialing them up or down, but without rewriting the DNA sequence itself. There are specific ways this happens. DNA methylation adds little chemical tags, usually turning genes down. Histone modification changes how tightly DNA is wound up, affecting if genes can be read. And there's also non-coding RNA, which helps regulate everything.
And the really mind-blowing part about epigenetics is how it connects things. Environmental stuff, diet, stress, toxins can actually put these tags on your genes, changing how they work without changing the DNA. And crucially, sometimes these tags can even be passed down to the next generation.
Exactly. It's like the environment can scribble notes in the margins of the gene manual, and sometimes those notes get inherited. It definitely adds a layer to Darwin's idea of variation shows it's not always purely random, but it also, interestingly, echoes Lamarck a bit. Not the purposeful striving, but this clear environmental influence on inheritance.
Okay, so building on Darwin, Lamarck's echoes, and epigenetics, Rob Coe's book introduces this feedback mechanism, FM. He presents it as this really important additional idea, challenging the view that only random mutation drives all adaptation. And this is where it gets really interesting.
It is. The core idea of FM is, well, quite revolutionary. It suggests the environment doesn't just filter survivals after birth. Instead, it suggests the environment directly influences organisms way earlier, during development, gestation in mammals, egg development in others. So evolution becomes less of a random lottery and more like this continuous conversation between the organism and its world, shaping each generation right from the start.
Yeah, let's go back to those opening examples for a sec, that giant leaf insect. The mimicry is just uncanny. Down to the leaf veins, the color shifts, even fake mold spots. The book actually does a rough calculation. The odds of getting just 5 coordinated traits like that by pure random chance. Something like 1 in 10 to the 15th power. A quadrillion. It makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Is randomness really enough? Or the blind mole losing eyes in the dark? These are big systemic changes.
And that's precisely the point the book makes about randomness alone falls short. There's this huge probability gap. Complex, coordinated traits seem incredibly unlikely by pure chance. There's also the coordination problem. An eye, or perfect camouflage, needs many parts working together now. How do random independent mutations coordinate that? And lastly, if it's all random, why do we see these patterns, this apparent directionality in evolution? Why do different groups often arrive at similar solutions, like wings?
Okay, so if randomness isn't the whole picture, what is the feedback mechanism proposing? How does it actually work? What are the principles?
Well, at its heart, FM flips the script a bit. The environment isn't just a passive filter. It's an active participant during development. Environmental cues, like a leaf's color, the temperature, what nutrients are around, act as guides, subtly activating or deactivating specific genes during development. This creates a feedback loop. The environment shapes the offspring. The better adapted offspring thrive, reinforcing the cycle. This potentially allows for much faster, more responsive adaptation because the environment itself is sort of nudging development in a useful direction rather than waiting for that 1 in a billion beneficial random mutation.
And it's really important to stress this evolution without design point. FM is not suggesting intelligent design. There's no plan, no foresight. The environment isn't consciously designing anything. It's more like development is porous and environmental information just kind of leaks in and shapes growth. Natural selection is still absolutely key. It decides what ultimately sticks around. It reminds me of that Richard Feynman quote.
Oh, the one about nature's imagination.
Yeah. I think nature's imagination is so much greater than man's, she's never going to let us relax. Captures it perfectly.
Right. So FM is positioned as this missing layer. It reframes variation. It's not purely random. It's environmentally biased, giving a mechanism for how organisms get nudged towards fitting in. Okay, let's try applying this. The classic giraffe's neck example. Lamarck said stretching. Darwin said selection favored longer necks naturally occurring. How does FM view this?
From the FM perspective, you'd think about it differently. Imagine a mother giraffe constantly reaching high for leaves. That's not just behavior. It involves physiological changes, resource allocation. An embryo developing inside her is exposed to these subtle internal shifts, these cues linked to the external environment, the need to reach high. This influence during gestation could prime the embryo, subtly biasing its development towards, say, pathways that favor net elongation. If that environmental pressure, high leaves, is consistent over generations, this feedback could amplify and speed up the adaptation. That really does paint a richer picture. So, back to our other examples. For the game of traits, like the leaf insect, the actual colors, patterns, textures of the leaves in its habitat could directly influence gene expression in the developing egg or nymph, kind of guiding the development of its body shape, its colors, its textures, like a living template for camouflage, and for loss of traits, like the blind mole.
There, the constant absence of light in its underground world would be the key environmental factor. This persistent lack of light signals could directly influence development during gestation, essentially telling the system, generation after generation, we don't need functional eyes here, leading to the downregulation of those genetic programs. And just to clarify the link with epigenetics again, epigenetics gives us the molecular tools, the switches and tags. FM is the bigger picture model. It's the idea that the environment uses those epigenetic tools, among others, as part of this developmental blueprint to guide adaptation. Epigenetics is the how for FM's what, basically.
Okay, this leads to another really interesting puzzle. How does FM explain the vast differences in evolutionary speed? Why do some species change so dramatically while others seem stuck in time as living fossils?
Yeah, the book tackles this directly. It suggests that species which have evolved the most, think birds flying from dinosaurs, mammals going aquatic like whales or taking to the air like bats, insects getting wings, all that variety, they tend to live in really dynamic, changing environments. Under FM, these constant shifting environmental inputs during development would keep reshaping traits, pushing adaptation, leading to faster, more visible evolutionary change. On the flip side, you have the living fossils, horseshoe crabs, coelacanths, crocodiles, ginkgo trees. These guys often inhabit incredibly stable environments. Under FM, if the environment stays pretty much the same for millions of years, the signals going into the developing embryo are also consistent. There's little pressure for change. So the feedback loop just reinforces the existing form, leading to very slow or almost noticeable evolution.
And this isn't just for mammals with pregnancies, right? It applies across the board.
Exactly. It applies to both gestating species and egg layers, fish, amphibians, insects, reptiles. For egg layers, the mother's condition and environment before laying the egg can influence its contents, and then the external conditions during incubation, temperature, moisture, light, directly impact the embryo's development. Those are the environmental inputs for FM in those cases.
Okay, wow. Now let's push this even further into what the book calls the speculative frontier. The quantum feedback mechanism, or QFM. I mean, quantum biology itself is already mind-bending. Finding quantum effects in photosynthesis, enzymes, even bird navigation, sense of smell. It's not just physics anymore. So how could these weird subatomic rules possibly connect to evolution via FM?
Well, QFM is definitely presented as speculative. It's an extension. If FM explains how the environment influences development, QFM asks what makes that connection so sensitive, so fast, so coordinated. It's questioning if standard biochemistry alone is enough to explain the speed and precision of how these environmental signals get translated into developmental changes.
The book throws out some possibilities based on quantum phenomena, like quantum coherence. Instead of flipping gene switches one by one, maybe an environmental signal could, through coherence, influence a whole network of developmental genes simultaneously, like a master control. Or quantum tunneling particles zipping through barriers. Could that allow certain developmental reactions to be triggered or stopped much faster than classical physics would predict? And then there's quantum entanglement, that spooky action at a distance. Could that somehow synchronize signals across different cells in an embryo in a non-local, coordinated way? It sounds like science fiction.
It does push the boundaries, and it connects this idea of the subatomic unity of life mentioned in the book. Fundamentally, everything's made of the same quantum stuff, organism, environment. There's no absolute hard line at that level. So maybe there's this constant, subtle exchange of information happening at the quantum level. Photons, chemical signals acting quantumly, resonance flowing from the environment into the organism, guiding development. But again, critically, even throwing quantum physics into the mix, neither FM nor QFM implies intelligent design. It's still a natural process. It just offers a potential mechanism for how the environment might accelerate or fine-tune the gradual steps of evolution that biologists observe, like biasing eye development toward better low-light sensitivity if the environment is consistently dim.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. The core message from our deep dive today: evolution, undeniable, Darwin's framework, essential, foundational. But the feedback mechanism, supported by epigenetics, maybe even quantum biology down the line, it offers this compelling extra layer, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If it holds up under more research, FM could really shift our perspective. It reframes evolution. Less pure randomness, more of an ongoing dialogue, where the variations that arise are already kind of environmentally biased, leading perhaps to more responsive, maybe even more efficient adaptation than we thought.
So what is the takeaway for you listening? It really prompts you to think about evolution differently, not just a random lottery, but maybe this continuous, subtle conversation between life and its surroundings, shaping every single generation, often starting before birth, in ways we're really only just starting to figure out. It makes you wonder, what else might be influenced by these deep pre-birth dialogues? As Rob Coe puts it in the book, randomness is only a placeholder we use to describe what we do not yet understand.
And he follows that up by saying, science is our best tool for answering the unknown. An open mind, paired with a scientific approach, allows us to move forward, which feels like a good place to end.